The Madman! Come one, come all. It's madness at the Darkmoon Faire. Coming November 17th, which is really early. 135 new cards, new set. Pretty exciting stuff. Everyone's always awaited the Darkmoon Faire. And not only are you getting Darkmoon Faire, you're also getting the Old Gods. And I think we should lead off with the man himself, Yongsaron, Master of Fate. One of the most dynamic entries into the game. 10 mana, 7/5 Battlecry. If you've cast 10 spells this game, spin the wheel of Yongsaron. This wheel has gotten a lot of chatter because 5% of the time, Yongsaron will cast Rod of Roasting. Rod of Roasting casts Pyroblast until someone dies. So, Pyroblasts fly all around the screen until someone is dead. That sounds really random, and it kind of is, but whoever had the higher amount of health will usually win. The other 5 sections are 19%ers. They can destroy all other minions and gain their stats. Cast a random spell for each spell you cast this game, so that's OG Yogg. Fill the board with random minions. Yours have Rush, so you can control the trading. And if they have more minions than you, which they probably do if you're playing Yongsaron, you get a bunch of minions and then you trade them. Take control of 3 random enemy minions. Fill your hand with random spells. They cost 0 this turn. Huge comeback card, which is a big callback to original Yongsaron. You would play that in control decks. You would play it and pray. Usually when you were behind and didn't have a board and they had a board, you would hope to get a board clear. Now though, I think the board clear is much more consistent. As random as it is, what it does is clear. You want to put this into a control deck where you're not looking to be ahead because you do not want to play this card when you're ahead. I imagine that this is going to be a very strong value card at the end of a lot of control decks. Control decks with spells in them, and of course control decks tend to be the ones with reactive spells, and they tend to be the ones that are playing from behind. So you're gonna see that wheel spin, I believe. I think it's very uncharacteristic of the Darkmoon Faire to have that 5% chance. You're not gonna see it very often, but when you do see the Pyroblast flying, it's gonna be very memorable. A great card, great theme for the expansion. Don't give in to the naysayers, Hearthstone team. You're totally on the right track. I am pro 5% chance of Pyroblast until death. Hearthstone is a bit of a clown fiesta of a card game, and that's not an insult. That's the colorful nature of Hearthstone. It only happens 5% of the time, but when it does, things explode. N'Zoth, God of the Deep. 10 mana, 5/7, Battlecry, resurrect a friendly minion of each minion type. Interesting new take on N'Zoth. This is actually much harder to use than the Death Rattles because instead of just putting Death Rattles in your deck, you have to specifically put in a relevant minion of each minion type. This is actually pretty hard to evaluate without seeing the Darkmoon Faire expansion in its entirety, because you'd imagine that there'd be more stuff printed in this set to give this more viability, and in fact there is, but over in Control Warrior Land, you have Armageddillo for a beast, you have Tomb Warden as a mech, you have of course big dragons. It's perhaps not that difficult to think of the value you can gain from N'Zoth, God of the Deep. All of these old gods have a bit of a theme, which is they're the big payoff card of control decks. You survive, you survive, you survive, and then you play your 10 mana card, and then big effects happen, and you swing the board in a big way. That's wonderful design from Whispers of the Old Gods, and I, of course, am more of a control player, and you may have noticed that the current meta, while pretty balanced, does have a lot of aggressive decks. So I, for one, enjoy the idea of there being a payoff, a major payoff to control decks, so that if they get to the late game, they win more consistently with this big old god card. Speaking of big effects, Cassoon the Shattered. 10 mana, 6/6. Start of game, break into pieces. The pieces are the Eye of Cassoon, a 5 mana, deal 7 damage, randomly split among all enemies, so basically Avenging Wrath, but 1 less mana, 1 less damage, good trade. Heart of Cassoon, 5 mana, deal 3 damage to all minions. Basically the old Excavated Evil. Body of Cassoon, 5 mana, summon a 6/6 Cthulhu's Body of Taunt. 5 mana 6/6 Taunt actually hasn't been printed yet, but is pretty efficient. And 5 mana Maw of Cthulhu, destroy a minion. That's Assassinate. While it's pretty likely that your control deck in this day and age would not be running these cards, for the minor cost of running these cards, you get the major payoff. Once you play all 4 of those cards, Cassoon the Shattered gets shuffled into your deck, and when you draw them and play them, it's 10 mana 6/6 with Battlecry, deal 30 damage, randomly split among all enemies. I think this card is at its best in obviously a deck that is looking as a game plan to draw their entire deck. And I've built many of these, including in the current expansion, Control Warrior. I thought about running even Chef Nomi in Control Warrior, like one big payoff card at the end after I'd drawn out my whole deck. Here's the reward. You basically win. There's a few ways that are interesting that you could cheat out Cassoon the Shattered earlier than expected, earlier than scheduled. Rogue has Stowaway, which can draw the pieces of Cassoon, which were not originally in your deck. Priest can discover the spells in your deck with Disciple of Yongsaron. And if for some reason you don't think deal 30 damage is enough, if you play this in Battlecry Shaman with a quest, and you play a tour guide beforehand, you can press the hero button to double your battle cries and then play Cassoon the Shattered to deal 60 damage. Final old god is Yongsaron the Defiler. Battlecry, add a copy of each corrupted card you've played this game to your hand. They cost 0 this turn. 10 mana, 10/10. All of these old gods are sharing the same stat line as the previous old gods. Nice touch. This leads us to the set's new mechanic. So to see what Corrupt is, let's take a look at Fleethoof Pearltusk. It's a 5 mana 4/4 with Rush. But if you corrupt it, it gains +4/+4. How do you corrupt it? It upgrades in your hand after you play a card that costs more than it. You have a Fleethoof Pearltusk in your hand, you play a 6-cost card, or a 7-cost card, or a 10-cost card. Fleethoof Pearltusk will become the corrupted version. 5 mana 8/8 Rush. It's actually Dig Day for 5 mana. But the catch is, it's very unlikely you'll be playing this on 5 unless you've done some mana cheating somehow to play a bigger card first and then this card. In short though, a card like this, and I actually think this particular card is perhaps the card that might see the most play with a bunch of these old gods, because N'Zoth, God of the Deep, for example, can resurrect a friendly minion of each minion type. That could be a key beast to resurrect, where you just get a 8/8 with Rush when you play the N'Zoth. With Yongsaron though, when you play this 10 mana 10/10, you just get a 0 mana 8/8 with Rush in your hand. So obviously requires a lot of setup, requires a big control deck, but the payoff might be significant. We'll have to see more corrupted cards to see. For Paladin, there's Day at the Fair. 3 mana, summon 3 Silverhand Recruits. Corrupt, summon 5. For 3 mana, you might be able to summon 5/1/1s. And that may not be that good. Because Druid has a card called Bees. It's 3 mana, basically summon 4/1/1s with Rush. So is it that useful for Paladin, which doesn't really ramp or anything, to play Day at the Fair probably on turn 5 at best, after playing a 4 mana card to upgrade Day at the Fair to corrupt the card? Don't know about that. And 3 mana, summon 3 Silverhand Recruits. Isn't that great? The non-corrupted version of the card, as you may have noticed, is a card you can play on tempo. And I actually really like the mechanic of cards that reward you for greed. The greed in this case is waiting for the card to become corrupted. This card may be significantly better if there is Silverhand Recruit synergy. Have to wait and see. And over in Shaman World, they got a Dunk Tank. 4 mana, deal 4 damage, spell. Corrupt, then deal 2 damage to all enemy minions. That's like a super swipe. 6 damage to the primary target, 2 damage to everything else. Corrupt seems to me to be a mechanic that you want to put into a value control deck. So a reactive card like this is pretty good, I think. It's definitely efficient if you can cast the corrupted version, and that's going to be the puzzle, figuring out if you can actually do that. you know, in a pinch, you can do 4 mana, deal 4. It's not very good to do that, but sometimes it'll be right for tempo. And if you're playing corrupt cards, you're gonna be thinking, should I put Yongsaron in my big control deck with corrupt? If you do, you're getting any of these cards for 0 mana. Next, here's a kind of a random card. It's a Priest Fortune Teller. 5 mana, 3/3 mech, taunt, battlecry, gain +1/+1 for each spell in your hand. Now I like comparing this card with the Warlock's Void Drinker. For 5 mana, you get a 7/8 with taunt that's not actually run in Warlock. I believe in general, Priest has better minions than Warlock, so point of comparison, if a 5 mana 7/8 isn't run there, this card probably has to be around an 8/8 to possibly consider play. To be an 8/8, you have to have 5 spells in your hand. Is that unlikely? Maybe not, but seems too inconsistent to me. Druid's got Guess the Weight. A very fun game. 2 mana, draw a card, guess if your next card costs more or less to draw it. Our mathematicians still need to figure out on average how many cards you draw with this card. But of course the things to consider are that there are many choices that when you see the card you draw, it'll be pretty clear that most of your deck costs more or less than it. But sometimes you'll draw the halfway point, and you'll get less than a 50-50 chance to guess it, because when you draw the halfway point, any of the manas that are the same cost will also fail. A guess of more or less will not, ever win if the next card is actually the same mana cost. My quick napkin math makes me think that this is probably draw 1.7 cards is what I'm going to guess the card to come out with. And there needs to be a bit more science to, decide exactly how many cards on average it is. Depends a bit on your curve. Not sure if it will be competitive or will not be. If it is competitive, I think it barely makes the deck. If it's not competitive, I think it barely misses the deck. And it's one of those cards that I feel like is very, very close to being considered in a deck. And while we're looking at Druid cards, here's Kiri, Chosen of Elune. 4 mana, 2/2, Battlecry, add a Solar Eclipse and Lunar Eclipse to your hand. This card is particularly interesting because this legendary card adds 2 cards that can actually be played in a deck to your hand. So it's 4 mana, 2/2, draw 2 real cards. And Solar Eclipse is 2 mana, your next spell this turn casts twice. That's pretty sweet. Definitely a card you'd want to consider putting in your spell druid deck. If you just copy a 2 mana spell, then, you broke even. But anything more than that, and you paid 2 mana to get an effect that's worth more than 2 mana, with the caveat that you had to play the other card on the same turn, so you couldn't play this on turn 3 to take advantage of a 3 mana card. Potentially huge upside to this card, and I think this is probably overdoing it, but if you're a dreamer, you could have played a small spell like Innervate, and then play a Solar Eclipse, play your Kael'thas, and then play, 10 mana spell. If you thought 1 Survival of the Fittest wasn't enough, why not cast 2? Sounds ridiculous, but I think the setup required for that is also ridiculous. Perhaps don't have it earmarked for anything in particular, just get value by doubling a spell. The Lunar Eclipse is a 2 mana, deal 3 damage to a minion. Your next spell this turn costs 2 less. So that is effectively 0 mana, deal 3. Caveat, you need to play a spell on the same turn you play Lunar Eclipse, after you play Lunar Eclipse. Clearly a card that you'll really want to consider in a spell-based druid deck. And there are a number of spell-based druid decks right now that may just be eyeing Lunar Eclipse, Solar Eclipse, Guess the Weight. So that wraps us back to Kiri, Chosen of Elune. Is a 4 mana 2/2, draw 2 specific cards good? Clearly a slow card, clearly a card meant to be in a control deck, some sort of value deck or a combo deck, and given a slow enough meta, yeah, value. And next, a little bit of miscellany. I've heard of murmurs of the good old create a custom Hearthstone card, which is a balanced 10 mana 1/1. And by God, they've done it in Hearthstone. Darkmoon Rabbit is coming up. Hilarious picture. 10 mana 1/1, rush, poisonous, also damages the minions next to whomever this attacks. At its best, this appears to be a 10 mana, potentially clear 3 minions. Very high mana cost, 10 mana, but perhaps you can cheat it out? The problem is, cheating out cards, you're generally trying to cheat out a proactive card, not a reactive card, and Darkmoon Rabbit is definitely a reactive card. Very difficult to imagine a world where a 10 mana 1/1 reactive card whose only purpose is to kill 3 minions, which are next to each other, sees play. But hey, maybe the rabbit will be pulled out of a hat, you'll see. One sneaky card that was seen that's not even in the Play Hearthstone list of cards is Fellscream Blast. It was in their stream for a brief amount of time while they were flipping at the collection window. Demon Hunter Fellscream Blast, 1 mana, lifesteal, deal 1 damage to a minion and its neighbors. This is the old mage shooting star card, but for Demon Hunter. And you might say, hey, that's unfair. Well, mage gets good spell damage, and Demon Hunter currently appears to have no spell damage, so you might play this as the straight up, 1 mana, just deal 3 damage, gain 3 health. This is clearly meant for the control-based Demon Hunter, a deck that does not currently exist, but could someday exist. And when that someday happens, maybe Fellscream Blast will be great in it. And there's a few neutral spell damage options, so you can see something like Thalnos for 2, and then play the Fellscream Blast, deal 6 damage, heal for 6 for just 1 mana on the Fellscream, and then, put a bit of a mana investment into Thalnos. And let's conclude with the man that's behind the entire fair. The shadowy, mysterious Silas Starkman. 7 mana 4/4 battlecry, choose a direction to rotate all minions. What does that mean? Well, you might have played through the Brawl, that's the carousel before. It's the carousel on a battlecry. When you play Silas Darkmoon, you get the option to either rotate the board clockwise or counterclockwise. That is actually a very valuable effect, which is why Silas is a 7 mana 4/4, because it's basically trade one of your minions for one of their minions. If you're really optimistic, this is a 7 mana mind control. If you're even more optimistic than that, it's a 7 mana mind control and also get a 4/4 and give them a 1/1. So basically like mind control that comes with a 3/3. Even in the worst case, where you're just a control deck and you have nothing on the board, you could just play Silas Darkmoon and rotate Silas Darkmoon off to the other side. They get a 4/4, but you get their big card. If Rattlegore ever sees Major play, Silas Darkmoon comes in and steals him. And if Silas Darkmoon sees a lot of play, Rattlegore probably doesn't see a lot of play. What an exciting first look at Madness at the Darkmoon Faire. And to think, our expansion is actually coming in 3 weeks? Yeah, November 17th. So the reveals are going to be fast and furious, and as always, here to review the cards is me. See you at the fair!